You've prayed the same prayer for weeks now, maybe months. You've said the words, closed your eyes, whispered the same request into the dark of your bedroom ceiling, and nothing came back. No answer, no sign, no shift in the circumstances that are keeping you up at night. So you start to wonder if you're doing it wrong. You start to wonder if God is disappointed in you, or worse, if He's simply not there, not answering, not listening, maybe never was. Here's the question that changes everything. What if God isn't silent? What if He's speaking, and you've just been trained to listen for the wrong thing? By the end of this video, you're going to understand why the loudest moments in your life are rarely where God shows up, and where you should actually be listening instead. Think about a smoke detector for a second. It's loud, it's obnoxious, it's designed to interrupt everything and demand your full attention immediately. Now think about your own heartbeat. It's rhythmic, it's constant, it's been keeping you alive since before you could form a single thought. And yet you almost never notice it because it doesn't announce itself. It just sustains you, quietly, in the background of everything else you're doing. Most of us are waiting for God to be the smoke detector, loud, sudden, impossible to miss. But more often, He moves like the heartbeat, steady, present, easy to miss precisely because it never stops. This is exactly where we find the prophet Elijah in 1 Kings 19. Just one chapter earlier, Elijah had called down actual fire from heaven. He'd watched God dramatically, undeniably show up in front of hundreds of people. He was riding the high of the most spectacular miracle of his ministry. And then a Queen Jezebel threatens his life, and Elijah runs. He collapses under a broom tree in the wilderness and asks God to let him die. This is a man who just witnessed fire fall from the sky, and now he's suicidal with exhaustion. Certain God has abandoned him. So God tells him, "Go stand on the mountain." And a windstorm comes, strong enough to tear rocks apart. Elijah waits. God is not in the wind. Then an earthquake. God is not in the earthquake. Then a fire. God is not in the fire. And then, barely audible, easy to miss if you wasn't paying attention, a still, small voice. A whisper. Not a visit. Not a transaction. A whisper. Here's where we meet two very different people inside this same story. The striver and the abider. The striver is the version of Elijah still expecting fire, still scanning the wind and the earthquake for evidence that God is real, that God cares, that God is close. The striver measures God's presence by intensity, loud answered prayers, dramatic breakthroughs. Anything less feels like absence. The abider is the version of Elijah standing at the mouth of the cave, still enough to catch a whisper he almost walked past. The abider isn't asking God to prove Himself through spectacle. The abider has learned that closeness doesn't always sound like fire. Sometimes it sounds like breath. Hear this clearly. Your unanswered prayer might not be God's silence. It might be your own noise. Because if you're anything like Elijah on that mountain, you've been standing in the wind and the earthquake and the fire of your own anxious thoughts, waiting for God to shout louder than your fear does. And He won't, not because He doesn't love you enough to be loud, but because He's inviting you somewhere quieter, somewhere that requires you to actually stop. What if the reason you haven't heard from God isn't that He stopped speaking, but that you've never stood still long enough to hear a whisper? So what does it actually look like to hear the whisper instead of waiting for the fire? Here are 3 shifts that move you from striver to abider. Shift 1. The volume switch. The striver measures God's presence by how loud things feel. The goosebumps, the dramatic answer, the undeniable sign. The flip is learning that intensity was never the measure of intimacy. The practice, before you pray tonight. Sit in complete silence for 60 seconds first. Not talking, not asking, just quieting the wind and the earthquake in your own head so there's room left to notice anything softer. Shift 2. The waiting switch. The striver treats waiting as proof that the prayer failed. The flip is understanding that Elijah didn't hear the whisper. Immediately, he had to stand through the wind, the earthquake, and the fire first, watching each one pass without giving up his post at the mouth of the cave. The practice: give your unanswered prayer a specific, fixed place, a journal entry, a note on your phone, and return to it weekly, not to demand an answer, but to notice what's shifted in you while you waited. Shift 3. The posture switch. The striver stands facing outward, scanning circumstances for evidence. The abider, like Elijah, eventually wraps his face and stands at the entrance, turned toward the source, not the storm. The flip is realizing you can't hear a whisper while you're straining to hear a shout. The practice: pick one recurring worrying this week, and every time it surfaces, physically pause and ask one question. What if this is quieter than I think? Before reacting. Picture this, a Tuesday morning. Weeks from now, where the same hard circumstance is still technically unresolved, but you're not falling apart in it anymore. You're not scanning the sky for fire. You've learned to recognize a quieter kind of company, the kind that was there the whole time, steady under the noise. You still bring your requests. You still ask boldly, but you've stopped needing the wind to prove he's near, because you've found him in the whisper enough times now to trust it's him even when it's quiet. It's not about hearing God shout. It's about learning to recognize his whisper. It's not about waiting for fire. It's about standing still long enough to feel breath. It's not about God being absent. It's about you finally being present enough to notice he never left. If this spoke to you, comment below. Teach me to hear the whisper. Let that be your own small act of standing at the mouth of the cave. And if you know someone running toward every wind and earthquake in their life, waiting for God to shout louder than their fear, send them this video. It might be the whisper they've been missing. Subscribe to Bible Revelation, because we're not here to hype you up. We're here to help you actually hear him.